say.
They feel proud. Oh, that's how we describe our Marines.
Então, eu agradeço a presença de vocês que estão no campo do orgulho.
I want to begin by thanking you for inviting Professor Bronner and I to Brazil, and I do want to say that you are welcome to invite us back as much as you like.
Often.
We like it here.
Yeah.
Eles gostam do Brasil.
So I'm going to talk about new social movements, but I'm even going to challenge the term new social movements.
Ele vai falar sobre novos movimentos sociais e
Challenge the notion of new social movements.
os desafios desses novos movimentos sociais.
But I want to begin by first framing my comments by going back to democracy.
Vai voltar para Marcos?
Democracy,
Democracia, vai voltar para democracia.
which involves Recusa.
Que envolve Marcos.
So we ended last night talking about my notion of democratic attunement.
Last night, you talked about?
Democratic attunement.
Então, na noite passada ele falou sobre
Befindlichkeit. That's the word. Das Wort, das können Sie übersetzen. Befindlichkeit.
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 Im Sinne von befindlich, so?
Attunement is Befindlichkeit. Attunement.
Ja.
Zit een term hier, Heidegger zijn.
What's the term?
Yeah, attunement. You could also make attunement maybe not the best English word.
Okay. Oh, sympathy, empathy. Empathy.
You
Yeah.
can talk about democratic empathy.
Yeah.
Da empatia democrática.
Democratic einfühlung.
Eu acho que é empatia
Sympathy,
democrática.
empathy.
Empatia democrática.
So,
Então ele falou na noite passada sobre a empatia democrática.
in chapter 1, the very first sentence of Iris Young's book, Inclusion and Democracy, is simply this: democracy is hard to love.
No livro, no capítulo 1 do livro de Irving,
The first sentence of Iris Young's
Iris Young.
Iris Young,
Democracy and Inclusion
a democracia e inclusão, está escrito
is democracy is hard to love.
que a democracia é difícil de amar. Não, é difícil amar.
That sounds like a strange thing to say in a world where everybody's talking about democracy.
Isso é difícil de falar no mundo em que todo mundo fala de democracia.
Democracy is easy to talk about because very few people know what it is.
A democracia é difícil de falar porque ninguém sabe o que é a democracia. É fácil. É fácil de falar porque todo mundo fala de democracia. Ninguém sabe o que é.
And I connect this to Recusa. Recusa also had a lot to say about democracy.
E Marcos tem muito a falar sobre democracia.
In One Dimensional Man, he talks about the term is a smooth democratic unfreedom.
No Homem Dimensional ele fala de uma confortável,
Smooth democratic unfreedom.
de uma democracia, de uma liberdade, de uma não liberdade democrática confortável.
And what he means by that is, although the term democracy is supposed to represent freedom, it has been used in such a way that it produces unfreedom.
O que ele quer dizer com isso é que a democracia pressupõe a liberdade, mas de fato ela acaba realizando a não
So we've been conditioned to believe that if we have free voting, we have democracy.
E nós acreditamos que se temos votos livres, eleições livres, nós temos democracia.
But Recusa has reminded us that the ability to vote doesn't abolish the slaves or the masters.
E Marcos diz que a livre eleição dos senhores não abole os escravos.
So voting may merely boil down to, now I'm not saying don't vote, please vote, if you have the ability to do that, that's important. But in some cases it boils down to which master am I going to serve? And the masters may not be that different.
We have to choose the masters to serve.
Masters make the same.
Porque nas eleições temos que acabar escolhendo a que senhores vamos servir. E os senhores são os mesmos.
So I say all of this to begin talking about social movements and to make the claim that the various social movements that we see around us sort of testify to the absence of democracy.
E falando de movimentos sociais,
Social movements, many of the social movements that we see testify to the absence of democracy.
que a maioria dos movimentos sociais testemunham a falta de democracia, a ausência de democracia.
People are engaged in struggle against each other, and the question is, well, what do these people want?
E as pessoas ficam se lutando umas contra as outras, e a questão é o que elas querem.
I think it's important to note that not all of these struggles are necessarily democratic. Some of them are democratic struggles. Some of them are not democratic struggles.
E nós temos que ver que algumas dessas lutas são democráticas e outras lutas não são democráticas.
So there's a struggle on one hand for democracy.
De lado nós temos lutas pela democracia,
And on the other hand, there's a struggle against democracy.
e de outro lado nós temos lutas contra a democracia.
And it still forces us to raise the question, what do people want?
E isso continua fazendo o que as pessoas querem.
So let's talk about some of these social movements and why I'm putting things this way. First of all, there is the language of new social movements, and I was actually reading the debate between Arnold and Nancy Fraser on this issue.
There is a language.
There is the language of new social movements.
Language.
The language, the rhetoric.
Então tem uma discussão sobre os novos movimentos, um debate, principalmente Nancy Fraser e Axel Arnold. They are arguing about this social movement.
Yes.
Então eles estão debatendo esses novos movimentos sociais.
Yes. And my position is that there are no new social movements.
A posição dele é que não há novos movimentos sociais.
There are new versions of old social movements.
Que eles são novas versões de velhos movimentos sociais.
Because the objectives of the old social movements have not yet been achieved.
Porque os objetivos dos velhos movimentos sociais não foram alcançados.
Let me give you an example.
Vai dar um exemplo.
So in the US and in other parts of the world too, we talk about ourselves as being in a post-civil rights era in the US.
E nos Estados Unidos se discute uma nova era pós-movimentos direitos civis.
Civil rights.
A era pós-direitos civis.
But what that simply means is that at a certain point in history, when blacks in America were fighting for freedom, certain laws were changed.
quando uma parte da América lutava
For freedom.
pela liberdade,
And certain laws were changed.
certain laws,
Yeah.
laws. E alguma perda,
Algumas leis mudaram.
laws. E algumas leis mudaram.
Laws were changed. Okay.
Algumas leis mudaram.
But that did not mean that blacks were liberated.
Isso não significa que os negros se libertaram.
Instead, racism takes on different forms.
E que agora o racismo tomou novas formas.
It becomes institutionalized.
Se tornou institucionalizado.
It goes undercover. Disguises itself.
Está disfarçado.
And so as a result, there are new forms of resistance to ongoing racism. There are new forms of resistance to
E
ongoing
existem
racism.
novas formas de resistência a esse racismo.
And so there are new terms that we use now. Diversity, multiculturalism, those kinds of buzzwords.
E usamos novas palavras, né? Diversidade, multiculturalismo,
Those are the only two. Gender, yeah, that's another. So what that says is that there's simply new terms, not new movements, but a new term that signifies the continuance of an old problem.
novos termos e não novos movimentos que continuam que continuam problema antigo.
So this is one example, but we can sort of begin to think about this now as we look at other social movements. I'm talking about everything from the Tea Party movement to the Occupy movement to the Arab Uprising.
Então, falando de novos movimentos, ele fala do Tea Party, do Occupy,
Arab Spring.
a Primavera Árabe.
So all of these movements suggest a kind of unrest, or that people are unsatisfied.
E todos esses movimentos parece que as pessoas estão insatisfeitas.
And the question is, what is the source of the dissatisfaction?
E a pergunta é, qual a fonte dessa insatisfação?
I'm going to say something crazy now.
Ele vai dizer uma coisa louca, maluca.
The world would change, or at least the U.S. would change, and hopefully the world, if the occupiers and the Tea Party would have a deep conversation. Is that bad? We can fight about that.
We can find that.
That if the world would change, the occupiers and the Tea Parties would have a deep conversation.
O mundo mudaria se o Occupy e o Tea Party tivessem uma conversa profunda.
So I say that because the question then is, what is the source of the struggle for both groups?
Ele pergunta qual que é a fonte para cada desses grupos.
So let's talk about the Tea Party for a moment. And what you basically have are poor white Americans who are aware of the fact that they are not getting what they've been promised in the promised land.
Fala que os americanos não têm aquilo que foi prometido a eles nessa terra prometida.
The occupiers feel the same way.
Para os Occupy é a mesma coisa.
The difference is that the Tea Party has been manipulated and led by an ideology that forces them to aim at the wrong target.
foi manipulado ideologicamente,
And forces them to aim at the wrong target.
para o alvo errado.
This is
False needs.
false. Yeah, false needs.
Ah, as necessidades falsas.
This is why the Republican Party at least appears to be falling apart. I hope they do fall apart, but they appear anyway.
Eu acho que aparentemente o Tea Party está
Because it is a party of the wealthy, a party that supports the wealthy, but they need poor whites to stay in office.
o Tea Party apoiado, eles apoiam a riqueza, mas eles precisam dos pobres. They need the poor
Need the poor whites to stay in office.
to stay.
In office.
Ah, que eles precisam dos pobres para se manter, para manter sua posição.
So how do you do that? You have to trick them into thinking that you have the same interests. And it comes down to religion, right? So they use religion, they use racism, they use sexism, they use sexuality.
Eles usam a religião, o sexismo, o racismo e a sexualidade.
And you can chime in if you want.
I think Arnold's right about the new social movements not being new. The Tea Party, but it's not for I think the reasons you give. The Tea Party is the modern manifestation of movements that went back to the beginning of the country. We can think of the Know-Nothings. We can think of Ku Klux Klan. We can think of the America Firsters. We can think of Joseph McCarthy in the 50s, the famous anti-communism scare. We can think of the moral majority, the silent majority, the whatever majority, and then we have the Tea Party. Oh.
Ele está dizendo que ele concorda com Arnold que esses movimentos não são novos. E o exemplo que ele dá é que o Tea Party seria uma continuidade de movimentos antigos. E aí ele deu uma série de exemplos, começando com No, Nothing.
Yeah. And they reflect what American political scientists call the paranoid strain in American politics.
Que político?
The paranoia.
Que é uma paranoia. Paranoia?
Strain in American politics.
Que é uma corrente paranoica na política dos
They have the
Estados
same.
Unidos.
They have the same class base.
Que tem a mesma classe,
They come from the same areas,
vem das mesmas áreas
and they basically have the same ideology.
e que tem as mesmas ideologias.
Now, I think Norman is onto some very good points here, but I don't think they've been manipulated at all.
Mas ele discorda do Arnold porque ele acha que eles não são manipulados.
Precisely because this goes back to the beginning of the country. That's a lot of manipulation.
Because?
It goes back to the beginning of America.
Porque eles estão no começo da América.
Maybe the idea why they can't talk to one another is because they actually don't want the same things.
Talvez porque eles não falem uns com os outros porque eles agem de maneiras diferentes.
Eles não querem as mesmas coisas.
Porque não querem as mesmas coisas.
Yeah. The new social movements seek an expansion of democratic possibilities. The movements, I think both of us would agree to. For women, for blacks, for immigration, for immigrants, and the like.
Que os novos movimentos querem
excluded.
Os excluídos.
Yeah. The Tea Party, its one primary base of support is white men. They're not poor. They're petty bourgeois. They're local contractors and the like.
O Tea Party ele é apoiado pelos homens brancos, mas eles não são pobres, eles são da pequena burguesia.
They envision a world in which their privileges are now threatened. And they are threatened. It's true. It's obviously true. The type of cultural world that existed in the 1950s doesn't exist anymore.
They are afraid because they are a threat.
You have a black man in power.
Yes.
These are existential interests, they're material interests, they're cultural interests, they're social interests. And we've got to be specific about what those interests are, in my view.
Então eles têm medo porque seus privilégios estão ameaçados.
Now, with regard to the movements in democracy, I think you're right in one sense. Democracy is never complete, and that's certainly the word we know. But I think a democracy, you can tell a democracy is functioning. This is just very quick. A democracy is functioning to the extent to which you have movements that are nonviolent. Because there's a belief that their interests can be addressed legally. Get that? Democracy is functioning. I mean, this is what democracy is. It's not the elimination of conflict. It's the expansion of debate.
A democracia está funcionando porque ela não é a eliminação do conflito, mas a expansão do debate.
It's not the elimination of power.
Não é a eliminação do poder.
It's the constriction of power, of arbitrary power.
A construção do poder arbitrário.
Yeah. In my view, what you see in the Arab Spring, and what's remarkable, for example, about the African American movement, in my view, is that it was able to, in some way, deal with racist oppressor in a civilized manner. That's its greatness. But there was some assumption always that grievances could be met through the legal system.
You talk too much.
I'm sorry. You wanted to go back? I said to...
for translation. Can you repeat?
Yeah. All right, let's do it this way. The extent to which democracy functions is the extent to which you have movements that express their grievances peacefully.
Na medida que você tem democracy, to extend democracy?
Yeah, the extent to which a democracy is working.
Yes. À medida que a democracia funciona, é na medida em que esses movimentos express
their grievances,
angústias,
their problems.
suas angústias.
The extent to which a democracy is not working.
À medida em que a democracia não funciona,
is the extent to which these grievances cannot be addressed.
À
Will
medida
not
em
be addressed.
que essas angústias não são expressas ou não podem ser expressadas.
This is structural.
É um problema estrutural.
When you look at the Arab Spring,
Quando olhamos para a comunidade,
at least from my experience, this is something where Iris and perhaps Monica, Nancy, all of them are just off. These people knew exactly what they wanted. The same thing that the Labor Movement wanted. They wanted a republic. And this is something we too often take for granted. It may be hard to love democracy. It's much harder to love a dictator, as you know.
Ele falou que na Primavera Árabe eles sabiam exatamente o que eles queriam e where they want the republic? In Arab? No.
Every place in the Arab world, the young people who came out, the young people who demonstrated, with workers' strikes, by the way, and here you're right with regard to the movement, there were 3,000 strikes in Egypt before
3.000 greves no Egito antes
before the Arab Spring.
da Primavera Árabe.
Incredibly brave people, but we don't hear about that because of this stupid media.
E nós não escutamos por causa da mídia estúpida.
Yeah. This is the stuff we have to look for. And these people die. I mean, it sounds trite, but people die for republics.
E as pessoas estão morrendo por repúblicas. Porque em all Arab,
Yes, everywhere there's
everywhere, the young generations want republic.
even in Iran.
Então, todos esses países eles querem a república.
If you think the Green Movement, there was a desire for a secular democratic republic.
Que eles têm desejo por uma democracia secular e republicana.
The reason that movement lost was precisely because it tried to negotiate. Its leaders, people from the Islamic regime,
Aí o problema
back and forth,
da perda da negociação.
and then boom. Yeah. And isn't it interesting that in the Arab world, the same classes with the same areas, rural areas, petty bourgeois in the bazaars, were precisely the ones who opposed the uprisings. But we don't think about that because there's no structural analysis. There's no analysis that's class-based. And you know who had the analysis? At least in my view. It's not any of those. It's Rosa Luxemburg. I think Rosa had the analysis. The mass strike.
Ele fala que falta análises estruturais e a análise estrutural.
1848.
The better structural analysis
Not-
Rosa Luxemburg.
Not the better, the only analysis.
A única análise estrutural é a da Rosa Luxemburg.
It's Rosa Luxemburg. How many of you know Rosa Luxemburg?
Let's read.
Quanto de vocês já leram Rosa Luxemburg?
Rosa Luxemburg was one of the greatest women revolutionaries ever. She was the great symbol of libertarian socialism.
Rosa Luxemburg é a maior mulher revolucionária de todos os tempos.
We also have a biology book. You ever saw?
She loved, that's right.
Yes. Isabel Loreno gives me a conference, and she brings us the book
That's
that
correct.
describes the leaves and trees.
That's exactly right.
And it's very.
And she was also the first woman to get a degree in economics from the University of Zurich.
Foi a primeira mulher a conseguir o
First woman in Europe.
grau, né? Graduação, diploma em economia em Zurique.
This is an amazing woman. I mean, she's just an amazing woman. And Rosa Luxemburg wrote about strikes in Russia
Ela escreveu sobre as greves na Rússia.
from 1902 to 1906.
De 1902 a 1906.
Trotsky called that the dress rehearsal for the, I don't know how you say that, dress rehearsal for the revolution.
Trotsky disse que era ensaio para a revolução.
Yeah. And imagine, you think of it in Recusa's terms. In 1902, there's a strike in Baku.
Em 1902 teve uma greve em Baku, na Rússia.